And today we are looking at another cup of code. We are talking all things Cucumber unit testing in our Spring Boot microservices architecture. We want to go through how we can implement test cases or unit testing using Cucumber and JUnit 5. So let's go through the project that we'll be implementing today. We have project base is Maven as always, language is Java, and we have Spring Boot version 3.4.3. And as always, I do recommend that you use the latest stable version. And the ask is please do like and subscribe for more content like this, because we go into detailed tutorials where you can essentially see how the code works, how to implement different features within Spring Boot backend microservices, and also Angular front end. So if you do, if you would kindly do like and subscribe, we'd really appreciate that to go a long way into making more of these videos. So let's proceed. That was just obtained over there. So the project metadata is group. So the group will be com.zip code. The artifact is Cucumber test microservice. The description is just a demo project for Spring Boot. It's just a showcase. And the package name will be the group and the artifact name. And then on the packaging, we'll make this a jar. And we'll have Java 17. I think going forward, well, maybe not as yet, but going to the future, we'll start using 21 or 23 so that we guarantee a much wider long-term support in terms of the Java version. And then dependencies, we have 3 dependencies that are available in the initializer. So we'll use Lombok, DevTools, and Spring Web. Obviously, if you have more to implement on your code, such as databases, you would then add those dependencies accordingly. So you would have your Spring Data JPA, you will have your, depending on which database you use, S2, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, and things like that. You just plug those in as per your requirement. But this should suffice for this tutorial. There are more dependencies that we'll add, particularly for JUnit and Cucumber. So I'll show you those in the code base, the pom.xml. So we'll go through that in a few, but also in the repository, you can basically find the code base, pull that, play around with it, see how you can basically test this microservice on your side and be able to play around with the code and then plug everything into your particular service, and you can basically have test cases that can run and ensure code quality before you deploy your stuff into any other environment. So all that being said, let's jump into the IDE and see how the project looks like. So over here we have the project. Also this configuration, I'll attach it on the description down below, but it should have everything in the repository, so that's not a problem. So yeah, let's go to the IDE and see how the code base works. So over here you will see that we have our application, and this is the main class. There's nothing fancy happening here, it's just a main Java class or main Spring Boot application class. And then what we have is one package, which is the controller package, as you can see here. And that controller package has a status controller, which is the endpoint that we want to use. You will see it has add REST controller, and we have the get mapping over here of status. And it doesn't do anything fancy. It just returns status, and we basically return up for the status to say that the status is up. But this is just to showcase what how you can implement test cases for your particular endpoint. And then going forward, we have most of the stuff happening in the test package. So in the application, you will see this test package. In the resources application.yaml, there's nothing interesting, nothing changed, nothing fancy. You'll see the properties only as the application name and nothing else. So we'll just ignore that and proceed to the test package. So in the test package, we have our application test. As you can see, we have our Spring Boot test annotation, and we also have the Cucumber context configuration. This is just to make sure that we have a configuration context for our Cucumber so that it can be able to execute and set up the Cucumber context. So that annotation should suffice. And then from there, we have our feature test steps or test scenarios. So let's go into that file. So this is just a file. It has a suffix of dot feature, and that's what it is. So you will see it has a feature here, and the feature is retrieve the status in the service. So this should be in the service, right? And then the scenario is client makes a call to get status, which is the status controller, this one over here. So we make a call to the status endpoint, and you will see that that's the scenario that we have. Then after this scenario, the checks for this scenario is when the client calls the status, then what we want to do is that the client will receive a status code of 200, and they will then receive the server status up. So the response from the server will be status up, as we basically added here in our controller. So this will return a 200 OK with the status of up. So that should basically be the test case for this feature. We're just making a call to the status endpoint. When that call is made, we want to get a 200 OK, and we want to get the response body, which is a status of up, which is a string. So now this has been added. Now let's see how this scenario is going to be catered for in our Cucumber test. So before I jump into the Cucumber test, let me show you the dependencies that you will need for your Cucumber to run in your code base. So we're going to go to the pom.xml, and you will see, if I scroll to the top, this is just the normal pom.xml stuff, nothing interesting there. It's all the configuration from the initializer. Then you will see the dependencies, the Spring Web, because we are creating a backend web application. And then we will have a Spring DevTools, and we'll have the Lombok as per our initializer configuration. And then the Cucumber configurations, these are the ones that we're going to use. Cucumber Core, Cucumber Java, Cucumber JUnit, and Cucumber Spring. And you will see we also have JUnit 4.13, that's the one that we're using. And then we have the JUnit Vintage Engine, that's the one that we are using. And then you have Spring Boot Starter Test for our test, for our Spring Boot test. So all of these dependencies, we are using them for our Cucumber test execution. So let's see how this comes into play. So first things first, we're going to go to Cucumber test, which is over here. And you will see here in the Cucumber test, we have annotation run with Cucumber class. So we want to execute a Cucumber test, we will run that with the Cucumber class. And then we'll have Cucumber options. So what options are we going to execute here? We specify the features. Obviously, the feature that we have is retrieve service status dot feature, which is what we have on our test features. And then we want to clue this. So to clue this, we will specify the steps package, so where our steps are actually held or hosted. Our steps are inside the Cucumber test microservice.steps, and you will see there's a Java class here with the test step. So if you have multiple features, like multiple files, feature files like this one, you'll basically then create those classes in here for those particular steps as well. And then the next package that we want to have is a package that has our context, our Cucumber context configuration, which is, in our case, it's our application test, and it has our Cucumber context configuration, and that is the package that we also add over there. It just happens to be this one, but if your Cucumber context configuration is in a different package, that should still be fine. You can still use that one instead of just the parent package. But in our case, that's what we have, so that should suffice. And then we have our monochrome set to true. So you will see that this should basically be enough for what we want to do. And then we also have our plugin just to make everything prettified. And that's about it for our Cucumber integration test setup. So that this is essentially the main class for the Cucumber run or the Cucumber test run. So you assume that this is the main run for Cucumber tests. Now let's go into the actual test step. So the actual test step is over here. And over here, what you will see, this is just a normal class. There's no special annotation to it. What we do is we mock our REST template. That's the only dependency injection that we need, because we are going to be calling a REST API, which is our status controller here. And then the next thing is a field that we want to create, a global field of response entity with a string, and that is basically response, which is null. So the way that we're going to use this is when the client calls status, we're gonna execute a GET request to the status endpoint. In our case, it's running on localhost 8080/status, and we're gonna execute this GET. So if I go to execute GET, you will see over here, this method takes a string URL, it throws an IO exception, and it checks if the REST template is null. If it is null, just create a new one or a new instance of REST template. If it's not null, then it's fine. You can just use what's available. So we actually just call the REST template .exchange with the URL, and the HTTP method is get, and we have we don't pass any body because there's no body to be passed over there. And then we have the string.class, which is the response type that we expect the body to be a string. And then that will basically make the call to status controller and give us the response entity as expected. So once we get that response entity, what we do is we set it here on our global response field, which is this guy over here. And once this call has been made, we then check if the status that we're going to get from our response want to assert that the response status, current status value, is the status code that we expect. And this, as you can see, the annotation over here, then we have the client receives status code of, and we basically have these string characters that will then assume the value that we specified on our feature, which is when the client is called, the status is 200. So this 200 is going to be passed in when our test case is executed, and it's going to be populated to this parameter over here. So this int status code is basically what we are specifying here. And that status code is going to come in, and we're going to say this current status dot value, which is what we got from the response, is this status 200. So we want to assert if these values are the same. If that is true, then the test case will pass. And we want to make sure that the client will receive the server status of this particular status, which is the string status. And in the same way, our feature will have the status, which is up. This is the status we have. And you will see that on our step, we take in that status as a string, and we assert that the status.getBody, remember the body is the status that we're going to get, is the same as the up or a down. So we're going to run this test case, and you will see that we'll execute, and basically everything should run through as expected. So the way that I would test it with Spring Tool Suite, what you need to do is run the main application so that it basically, let me just say, okay, let's see, where is it complaining? Application, let me just close this, and Cucumber Paul. Let me close that. Right, cool. So let's see, this is the test case. It's running the test case. Let's see. Well, this is fine. Okay, it's running the application. Boom, boom, boom. Right, cool stuff. So this will be a connection refused because the application is not running. Yes, connection refused. That is fine. So now let's run the actual application and then run the test after that. So let's do this. I'm gonna run this as a Spring Boot app. So it's gonna come up on port 8080. Once that is done, then you can run the test. So let me just go to Cucumber test. Application is starting. Started application port 8080. That is fine. Now here I can just right click and I can just run the JUnit test, or I can just run this Cucumber test. I can just do that, and you will see if I go to JUnit test, it will come up over here. Just wait for that guy to run. Code's coming up, running, and it is looking fine. So wait for it to hit the endpoint. Boom. Right, so you can see one test was run and no errors, no failures. Everything is green. That's looking good. Everything is ticked. Everything is ticked over there. So client makes call to get status, retrieve the status in the service, and basically that's about it. So everything ran through as expected, and we are good to go. So you can see even here on the logs, when client makes the status code of 200 and the status of up, and if you go there, there is basically, these are all the methods that we called: get status of, and the receive status of that. So it's basically able to tie the feature test case to the actual test steps that we defined in our steps definition class. So everything ran through as expected. So let's just do one thing over here on the steps. Let's say, or not even on the steps, just on the, let's say here we expect a down, something like that. We save this and we come back here. Let's run this again, and then let's see how that looks like. Let's see. So now we put down over there, and we know the service is returning an up, so we will see a failure. Right, so expected is down, but what we received was up. So you see, expected down, but was up. So this is a failure, and you can see that it failed, and basically failures is one. We need to address that test case and make sure that everything is according to what we expect. So this feature has been defined, and we were able to define steps for the feature, and we got the response as intended, and basically that's about it for Cucumber test. You basically define your feature steps in the syntax, where your feature with the scenario and the steps for that particular scenario. Then once those steps are defined, you go into your Java steps definition, you implement all of those. Any dependency injection, you basically mock those. If there's business logic that you want to inject and test and run it against that, you can basically do the same. What we're doing with testing an API, and also if you want to, let's say, over here, add a different endpoint for whatever reason. So let's just say you want to test, let's say maybe valid, something, you want to make sure that something is valid, say valid, and then we say, let's just put a success for whatever reason, right? Success, just like that. We save this, and because now we have this endpoint, we can just create a feature for it and say retrieve service feature, or even if we don't even need to actually create a entire feature here, we can just create a different scenario over here, and we just copy this, or let's just do yeah, I think it will be cleaner. Let's just make it an entire feature so that it's much cleaner. Let's say service valid, right? Then we say okay, and we come to this guy. We say retrieve the valid. Let's just do that. The valid in the service. So the client makes a call to valid endpoint, and when the client calls valid, right, something like that, the client receives a status code 200, and the client receives service status of say success. We save that feature, and we go to our Cucumber test. We are going to add a feature here. Copy this, paste it here, say comma, and we're going to add the feature. I'm going to say this is valid feature. And then now that we have that feature, we basically go here, we copy this, paste, okay, we save that. So this is, we just call it valid. Let's just make sure that this is fine. Cool. So that's valid, and we go to valid. These are the steps. It's going to do the same thing, but instead of that, we're going to call valid, and we're going to call valid over here. And you can pass in whatever you see fit. We're going to make the client and we get valid. Let's just do valid. Boom, boom, boom. We don't need to change much. And we also going to server receives valid, and the client receives status, boom, boom, boom. Then that should basically suffice. Let's go to the feature. Let's say receive status, code service status, this is valid, receives valid. This is status code because that's the HTTP status code, so that should be fine. So come back here. This will be status. Yes. Status code is that server valid. Boom, boom, boom. Then let's see valid status code server valid. Cool. So now that is fine. Now we have two test cases with these steps defined. We go here. We say rerun. Let's see how it looks like. So now we need to see 2 steps ran and 2 steps successful. So you can see now it's running the first one. It's over here, makes a call to status. Right, there's an issue there. Why is there an issue? Duplicate step definition. Let's see. The client step. Oh, yeah. Let's go to that and catching glue, boom. So let's go to this step, and that is the step. That is fine. And then this step, we are going to say this issue get. Let's just make this get valid. This is, just make this as valid, and receives valid. Okay, so let's save that. Let's come back here and let's rerun these. Status code. This is the boom. Okay, that is unique. Let's make this valid. And then on the feature as well, just make this a valid code. That's fine. So we have valid, everything is unique. Yep. And then let's come back here. We have valid. Okay. Then let's run this. Yep, that should be fine. So now all the steps are unique for each feature, which is good. Then now to execute all the steps successfully. Alright. 2 ran, 2 successful. So you can see you got ticks for this, and you got ticks for this. So we're able to run the 2 features, and we're able to test our code with newly introduced changes, and we can basically test status, and we're able to test the validity, and we can see our test case ran through as expected. And for this one, that's about it. The ask is very simple. Please do like and subscribe. And until next time, for now, cheers.